I'm ABC journalist Emily Burke. 6 years ago, I covered a story about two men who went to sea, but only one came home. The boat's skipper, Andrew Witton, vanished in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Ever since, his family's been determined to solve the mystery of his disappearance. What they've discovered is a story of survival from Andrew's crewmate, Simon Golding, and many unanswered questions. Tonight, for the first time, we hear their stories.
Have you told the complete truth about this matter?
Yes, I have. I'm not pretending to be an angel, but I'm not a murderer.
Were you doing drugs on that boat?
No, definitely not.
Do you still think of Andy?
All the time. I still think of Andy. 7 years on, I think about it. There's been so many ripple-on effects, and it just, I still think about him.
Every time I think about Andrew, it grates on me. What really happened? If only the boat could talk to you and tell you the whole story. It's just an absolute mystery. Who knows what happened out there? Who knows what went on?
Never ever knowing what happened to Andrew, how it actually happened, is the hardest part of all.
Andrew, from the time we were really young kids, we were really intrigued by him. He was a man like nobody we knew around us. He was a whole lot different to other men that we knew of the same age. There was no children, there was no wife, there was no regular job. He just had this life full of adventure. I don't think money meant anything to Andrew, probably because he didn't have much of it ever. The freedom that he probably found out in the sea had no price, so he was out living his dream, and probably the dream of many people around him, truth be known.
See how he's lost his hair? Yeah. Look at that fish, look at the size of it. Whoppers, aren't they?
It was his dream to be a famous surfer. He just lived for the ocean, for his fishing, his surfing, his sailing, just loved it. And he always wanted to own a boat, but of course they're very expensive.
Oh, that's at Macleay, where he had the extra bit added to the boat. Remember the extra bit at the back?
Andy bought a yacht to go surfing, basically, and that's what drove him. Sold everything to buy this yacht. He'd had photos of it as a kid. He didn't care how fast it went, as long as it kept going and didn't, fall apart. Although at times there was always money to be spent on it that he didn't have.
Most of the time with Kailea, he was based in Coffs Harbour. He lived on the marina there. He was a very handy builder. He'd do renovations, he could paint, do a bit of plumbing, and that would give him the funds to then go on his next journey.
The last time I saw Andrew was in Pittwater in Sydney. Andrew was getting ready to take on this trip across to South America. He was picking my brains as to how far south to go into the Southern Ocean to pick up the westerly flow, and he was most excited about the trip and getting up to the Caribbean for the Cricket World Cup that year. He had another crew member with him, a gentleman by the name of Simon Golding.
I met Andy through mutual friends at Coffs Harbour Yacht Club, and we were good mates. We got along well. He was pretty well an adventurous soul like myself. I was a paratrooper in the military for 3 years. I got out of that and started flying helicopters. I've done a fair bit of base jumping in Europe and other parts of the world. Back in the day, there was about 20 of us flying wingsuits off cliffs, so done a few world records doing that sort of thing. Our plan was to sail Kalia from Sydney to Tahiti and eventually go through Galapagos, Costa Rica and then through the Panama Canal into the Caribbean. We set sail from Sydney in August 2006, headed east over the top of New Zealand and in a big arc up to Tahiti. Then I flew back to the UK for a while and he had friends coming over to do surf charters.
Andrew basically had run out of money, didn't have very much money left at all. It was clear that it was his intention to head home.
I'd heard that Simon wasn't coming back, and then all of a sudden he was coming back. He came back to the boat, and Simon, he was saying, well, I can pay, I can help you out with costs. I'm pretty sure that Andy would have come back to Australia if Simon hadn't turned back up.
We were roughly somewhere in between and below Pitcairn and Easter Island. It's incredibly isolated being out in an ocean, let alone that ocean. It is probably the most isolated place on the planet. Apart from Andy, getting a bit cross at there being no wind or whatever, the mood was fine.
Andrew kept a logbook for Kalia. Basically every 6 hours he would record his position, and the last sort of 10 days of his entries were full of frustration at really not making any progress. There was no wind, they couldn't catch a fish. He put a couple of expletives in there about being becalmed.
I've decided to drop all sails and shut down engine and boat for the night. There is still no wind, or any sign of wind. Wind has finally picked up, a bit, from north-northeast, heading in an easterly direction to Easter Island. Frustrating sailing, drifting, hate being becalmed.
I think I went downstairs to have a nap, and I estimate that was probably about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I woke up and realised Andy wasn't on the boat. I then searched the boat at least, a couple of times, up topside and then down. I recorded the time, the lat and the long. It was 5:38 p.m. So then I started to think that I had to find Andy.
What was going through your mind?
Disbelief. I couldn't believe, the reality of it.
How did you feel in your body?
Sick. I figured I'd roughly been asleep for 4 hours or so. We were doing about 7 knots, so I swung the boat around to a reciprocal bearing and I started a grid search pattern. The decision to stop looking for Andy was probably the hardest decision I've ever had to make. I was, by this time after 2 days and 2 nights, I was pretty well in a hurricane situation. I was fatigued and it got to the point where it just would have been just too dangerous for me to stay.
That was fairly horrendous. We left New Zealand and we set off to cross the Pacific. But it was a big call because our first stop was going to be Easter Island. That was 4,000 nautical miles. It calmed down through the night, and it was the following day I saw, wow, there's a boat out here. We hadn't seen anything at all since leaving New Zealand. I called out to the others who were down below sleeping and said, quick, quick, come upstairs, have a look, we've got another boat here. It was quite an exciting moment. But it wasn't in the best of states, first of all, so it had quite torn sails. So I went downstairs and I called up the boat on our VHF. There was no reply initially.
Calling unknown vessel.
And so I called him again and persisted with calling the boat. And finally, this voice did reply.
Cuddy Hunt, this is Kailea. Go ahead, over.
I was repairing sails, I think, from memory. I was surprised to see another boat. They were probably just as surprised to see me. They'd gone through the same storm. Then I told them about Andy going missing.
That was something that was not expected and quite shocking. We talked about how awful it would have been to have lost someone overboard. The whole conversation was quite difficult. He was difficult to talk to. He didn't answer easily. I offered him the chance to come along with us. He could sail in company with us, and that we were going to Easter Island. Easter Island wasn't in his plans, obviously. He did say he wanted to go to the Galapagos, and I said, can we help you? Is there anything we can do? And he said, no, there is nothing you can do. I asked him, is there anyone we could tell or let know? And he said no, he wanted to do it himself.
In hindsight, I could have told that skipper. I could have told them my name and the name of the person missing, but I hadn't slept. I had a lot to deal with, and I probably wasn't thinking the most straight. I remember the first time I saw land after 6 weeks. It was beautiful. All of a sudden I was in the Galapagos and there was bird life everywhere, and I felt like I'd made it. I was just focused on getting into port, getting everything together and reporting Andy missing. I rang Louise, and it was a horrible phone call. It was the first thing that came out of her mouth was, why didn't you call someone a month ago? Which I didn't know what to say.
I was beside myself and just couldn't comprehend what I'd heard. So many questions that I needed to have answered. I didn't even know who to ring, how to start. To then find that he disappeared a month and a day prior to us finding out was just devastating. It meant that there was no way we could do a search.
My plan for Andy's boat was I was going to get the repairs done in Galapagos, but if the facilities weren't right, I'd then take the boat to Costa Rica.
All he wanted to do was to get all the paperwork done, make his statements about Andrew's disappearance and set sail. And it's like, no, we don't want the boat to go anywhere. After
Louise's contact, I then started to feel like I was under scrutiny by the authorities. I was ejected off the boat.
I was asked to deliver a boat from the Caribbean back to New Zealand. Well, when we got to the Galapagos Islands, we pulled in at sunrise, and as we came into the harbour, Kailea was sitting there, and she was the first boat that I saw. I thought to myself, God, the boat's in a bit of a state. It wasn't till later that obviously I found out that Andrew had gone missing and the boat was impounded. I went out to the boat with a couple of the local authorities and just felt eerie on the boat. I didn't find any navigation equipment. The EPIRB on board was in town, being sold off. All his fishing gear was gone. The boat, there was nothing left. I found it very strange that the GPS had gone, because that would have put to rest any question of conspiracy to the story, because it would have plotted the whole course. There was absolutely nothing there to confirm or deny the story of what had eventuated. Mostly I was pretty upset. Not only had I lost my mate, but to then have his boat, everything gone as well that should have been. Yeah. They gave me his logbook to have a look through, right up to his last log entries, and then I found out it was calm conditions. Someone that's been at sea for 40 plus years falls off over the side of his own yacht in flat calm conditions. It's pretty unheard of. And saying that, it is possible.
The Galapagos police completed their report. They interviewed Simon, so it was his relaying of what happened. They made the conclusion that Andrew probably fell overboard at the stern of the boat where they would normally go to the toilet. They didn't believe that any crime had been committed, and that was the end of their investigation. Kalia was brought back to Australia by two guys we contracted to sail her back. The investigation really heated up after that, or the interest really heated up.
Now, some other things that I found in the logbook were...
We were contacted by the Water Police and someone from Customs.
They can have a look at what we've discovered in our investigations.
She was clearly a little frustrated. It was her view that Andy had met with misadventure, and it was outside our charter, but we had a look at the investigation that was completed over in South America and some theories that both Louise and her partner had. And it was our view that sort of the events that followed Andy going overboard were quite extraordinary, really. You know, there was a number of opportunities for Simon, we thought, to perhaps take a softer, more safer avenue when another vessel came up alongside of him.
Says that no charges were going to be laid and the boat was free to leave.
Both Andy and Simon had come to Customs notice before, both loosely narcotic related. The fact that they were travelling together naturally would pique our interest.
There's some interesting things here.
Right from the very word go, I shared with them, it's important you know this, because Andrew did have a record, but he was, you know, it was years prior, and they were aware of that.
Andy had a couple of prosecutions for narcotics. Probably the most notable one was endeavouring to bring Buddha sticks into the UK. To my knowledge, there was nothing apart from his long past that was of concern. There was no reason for us to have any concerns that he was up to illegal activity. Simon, on the other hand, had come to notice a few years prior when a sea cargo container of furniture had come into Australia. It was examined by Customs and found to contain a quantity of ecstasy. Due to the unusual circumstances of that importation, it was believed that probably couldn't get a brief of evidence together for a prosecution, so the matter rested, and this was really probably the first time that Simon had come to our notice. It was difficult because he did appear to be a bit of an enigma. We couldn't find anything concrete from Simon where he was getting his money from. You know, a person that's able to travel the way he was doing, a lifestyle allowed him to come and go as he pleased to places like the UK and South America and back without any visible form of income seemed a little odd to us.
Louise briefed us on a number of issues and sort of specifically around the search undertaken by Simon for Andy, which certainly raised some concerns.
This map actually came off Kailea, so it was quite fitting, in fact, that this be used to plot.
Jeff, my partner, is a capable navigator, has the boat of his own and also flew with Qantas. Jeff plotted the position of the man overboard as written on that scrap piece of paper, and he then plotted the meeting point of Cutty Hunk.
Simon's statement said that he remained on station in the man overboard position, sailing backwards and forwards for 2 days and 2 nights, looking for Andrew. After 2 days and 2 nights, he said he left the man overboard position and continued sailing on towards Galapagos, which is up the top here. So he was actually leaving from a position astern of Cutty Hunk. So he had to be going faster than that to be able to catch Cutty Hunk to meet mid-ocean. This I worked out to be an amount of 9.5 knots. And for Kailea, a heavy cruising boat with shredded sails, an inexperienced yachtsman on board and an engine that was intermittent and taking water is a very difficult thing to achieve over a 48-hour period.
The boat was, I think Jeff worked out, would have to go at something like 9 knots, 24 hours a day, and there's no way the boat would need to break before it could do that.
It didn't make sense. Therefore, the question remains that when help was offered by Cutty Hunk, why did Simon choose to sail to Galapagos when he had Easter Island as close as that? To Easter Island was 950 nautical miles, and to Galapagos was 2,767 nautical miles. So these formed the major points that I made to the water police. My theory is that Simon has some very serious questions to answer as to what happened on the boat. There's a serious question of credibility there.
Seasoned yachtsman Andrew Witton vanished overboard somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. An inquest has been told his sailing companion waited a month to raise the alarm and didn't sail to the closest island to get help.
The news that an inquest was going to be held into Andrew's disappearance was just like such great news.
There was no stone unturned. It was like, OK, well, we'll do this little charade for the family. It was extensive, it was involved.
Mr Golding told the inquest he'd been below deck when his friend went overboard, and Mr Witton's family says many questions remain unanswered.
How and when and where and why and how did it happen and what did you do, and
also why the EPIRB was not activated when he discovered that Andrew was not on the boat.
I was being accused by the Wittons of foul play, and I didn't understand where they were coming from because, in my mind, I'd done everything correctly.
The evidence against Simon was circumstantial. In particular, his decision not to report Andrew's disappearance promptly, the fact that he didn't accept an offer of help from another boat, the Cutty Hunk, and the fact that he wanted to sail on to Costa Rica well after Andrew went missing. But crucially, the coroner found that Simon's assertion that he was still searching for Andrew 48 hours after he went overboard was a clear lie.
There was an expert at the coroner's inquest implying that I hadn't searched at all or I hadn't searched properly. My response to this is experts get things wrong.
Mr Golding's former girlfriend said he'd developed an obsession with boats but couldn't afford one, and he once said the only way to get one was to go sailing and push someone overboard. Mr Golding denies making those comments.
They're saying the facts are 10 years previously I said to someone, I'm going to push someone overboard to get a boat. I was saying I didn't like Andy's boat. I ended up hating Andy's boat. I never liked Andy's boat. I could quite easily go to any marina and pick out the boat of my choice and take it.
Mr Golding strenuously denies any involvement in the disappearance of his friend Andy Witton.
I think the way I've been depicted in the media, I've been absolutely slaughtered. I stand by my decisions, and I still stand by my decisions.
The coroner referred the matter to the Commonwealth DPP, and she suggested that they investigate the possibility that Simon picked up money from Europe when he left Tahiti for the purposes of a drug deal in South America, and that somewhere along the way Andrew Witton became aware of this, and that led to an argument. But ultimately, the Commonwealth DPP decided not to pursue the case.
And as a result, an open finding was passed down for Andrew's death. We just tried to resume a normal life, and 4 months later, I get a phone call from a cousin of mine to say, "Have you seen the Australian newspaper today? Simon Charles Golding, 41, from Waterloo, and 3 others arrested for Australia's 3rd largest drug haul, 1/2 a tonne." And I just couldn't believe it.
Authorities allege this 40-foot sailing boat met a South American ship about 800 kilometres off the Australian coastline to pick up the cocaine.
This was a very large-scale and complicated operation due mainly to the horrendous weather conditions that prevailed throughout. Through the course of the operation, it hadn't occurred to me that Simon would be involved, but I think in my own personal view, a lot of pieces to the puzzle started to come together. I had a chance to reflect on what we knew of Simon and his past, and now finding him an integral part of this syndicate led the mind to start thinking more about the ill-fated 2006-07 voyage with Andy, and probably cemented again in my own view that I was reasonably confident that they were heading over to South America to pick up probably cocaine and come back. I'm undecided as to whether Andy was in on that or whether he was an unwitting participant because he owned the boat. That I suppose we'll never really know.
It just didn't make a sense for a bloke like Andy to just disappear, not with the experience and the sailing he's done. I was with Andy when the boat was in Coffs Harbour. I think he'd had the boat refitted at that stage, and he was saying how much the money it bleeds him and whatever. And then he just mentioned, he says, I did have an offer to bring a load of coke back from Costa Rica. And I said, oh, what? He says, yeah, sail it into New Guinea, and apparently paratroopers were going to grab it and fly it into Australia and jump out of the plane with it, strapped to themselves. And my jaw hit the deck and went, you're kidding. He says, I've told you, but I knocked them back. I said, what was your show? And he says, well, they said they give me $2 million. And I went, oh. He said, but you're right. He says, I don't need the money. He says, it'd be nice, but I'm not going to put my freedom in place of the boat. Now, I've got no proof or anything like that, but I think Andy would have had an offer in the crossing between Tahiti that there was a job to maybe make some money and bring some cocaine back to Australia, to which I believe Andy would have said no. I don't believe it was an accident. It was a rough and ready ship, but Andy just couldn't slip off a boat.
I did not push Andrew overboard. I don't want to be an angel. I lead an adventurous life. I'm not going to abide by all laws, no. But I do have good morals. The whole thing's a tragedy, but the fact is people fall off boats. Plenty of people fall off boats.
Were you planning to transport drugs on a return trip from South America with Andy?
No.
This was Simon Golding in happier times, thrill-seeking in Norway. German national Holger Sander was once a skate champion. The men, along with another Australian, Terence Elfar, are now convicted drug smugglers after a jury found them guilty of trying to bring in nearly half a tonne of cocaine into Queensland.
We'd like for the Commonwealth DPP to reopen Andrew's case based on all the points that the coroner put forward, with the addition, what we believe the really important addition of, here we have a motive. The motive was a vessel. We firmly believe that Andrew's boat was Simon's aim. I know the authorities can't rule out that Andrew wasn't involved, and neither can we. We, as a family, would like to feel that he wasn't involved. When it comes to grieving, I mean, I'll grieve forever for my brother. If you don't believe that he died of natural causes, that makes it pretty hard.
That was his biggest fear, to watch his boat sail away from him. That's what he had even told me in past trips. My biggest fear is seeing me boat, falling off and seeing me boat. He says, it doesn't matter what you're doing, you cannot swim after a boat.